I bartend in Sacramento and don't get a ton of days off, so when my friend Bryce texted about a long weekend at a lake house up at Shasta, I said yes before he even sent the Airbnb link. It was supposed to be 6 of us total. Me, Bryce, his girlfriend Danny, her best friend Nina, and a couple I hadn't met before, Jake and Marissa. 4 nights, decent weather, and no real plans besides relaxing. Just what I needed. I'd been working double shifts and needed something that felt like air. We got there on a Thursday afternoon. The place was tucked into a little cove on the northeast end of the lake. Not completely remote, but far enough that there weren't other houses in sight from the dock. The water was glassy, the air smelled like pine and charcoal, and the house had that old cabin feel, with creaky floors and hand-me-down furniture. The kitchen had one of those yellowed fridges that buzz when it runs, and the back deck had a view that made you stop and breathe deeper. It was perfect. The first 2 days were exactly what you'd expect. Beer, burgers, bad music, floating in the lake until your skin pruned up. We played card games that turned loud by midnight, grilled way too much food, and passed around a Bluetooth speaker that always ended up playing the same 3 songs by the end of the night. Nights were a blur of wine, half-drunk ghost stories none of us really believed, and laughter that echoed across the water. We even made fun of Bryce when he locked the bedroom door the first night. "What? You think Bigfoot's gonna sneak in while you're spooning?" I remember asking. He laughed it off, but I noticed he started keeping a flashlight by the bed after that. On the 3rd morning, I went down to the dock alone. Everyone else was still passed out or groggy from the night before. I wanted to dunk my face in the water and maybe sit on the edge with a coffee. That's when I noticed the kayak. It was tied up to the far side of the dock. A faded yellow one, the kind you rent at state parks. We hadn't brought one. No mention of a kayak in the rental listing either. I figured maybe one of the neighbors had tied it there by mistake or drifted over in the night. But the rope was wet, like someone had just stepped out of it and tied it up, not soaking like it had floated for hours. Fresh. Curious, I pulled it in closer. It was scratched up, but nothing unusual for lake gear. There was one of those hollow storage compartments in the back. I opened it, expecting to find a life vest or maybe a spider. Instead, there was a Polaroid. Old, weathered, edges curled from moisture. I pulled it out and squinted. It was a photo of us, taken from the tree line across the water. The 6 of us, sitting on the dock from the day before. You could see the red Solo cups, the inflatable swan, Bryce mid-cannonball. It had been taken without us knowing, from a distance. I didn't show anyone right away. I don't know why. Maybe I thought it was some kind of prank. Maybe I didn't want to be the guy who freaked out over nothing. I slipped the photo in my hoodie pocket and casually mentioned the kayak at breakfast. Jake said he thought it was one of ours and shrugged. Danny said she hadn't noticed it earlier. Bryce was too busy making pancakes to care. So that was that. But all day I kept checking the dock, watching the tree line, listening for oars or branches snapping. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. It wasn't loud or obvious, just this weird itch, like we weren't alone. That night, we made a fire. Bryce brought out his Bluetooth speaker and played that indie folk stuff he loves. I nursed a beer and kept my back to the woods. At one point, Danny went back inside to grab marshmallows, and I followed. Just for a second, I looked out the back window. I thought I saw movement near the edge of the trees. Not big, just a flicker of someone stepping behind something. I didn't say anything. Around midnight, I slipped away and checked the dock one more time. The kayak was gone. Not drifted off. Gone. The rope, which had still been looped when I last checked, was floating in the water, slack and undone. Nothing looked disturbed, but the kayak was no longer there. I walked out to the end of the dock and stared across the lake, trying to spot anything out of place. Nothing. Just the reflection of the moon rippling slightly. Back inside, I considered waking someone up, but decided against it. I figured maybe one of the neighbors had taken it back, or maybe it really had been part of the rental and someone came to retrieve it. The next morning, I brought up the kayak again. Everyone sort of brushed it off. Maybe it was a neighbor's, Marissa said, sipping her coffee. Bryce shrugged. No one really seemed interested. That bugged me more than it should have. On our last day, we cleaned up, took out the trash, packed the coolers, stripped the beds. I did a final sweep before we left, just habit from all my bar closings. As I slid the glass door shut in the back, something caught my eye. Taped to the inside of the door was another Polaroid. It was us again. Same angle as before, maybe a little closer. We were around the fire pit this time, Bryce in his hoodie, Nina laughing at something Jake said. I was holding my beer, looking over my shoulder, right toward the trees. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't call anyone over. I peeled it off the glass, slid it into my pocket next to the first one, and walked out without saying a word. I still have both photos. Haven't told anyone. Sometimes I'll pull the Polaroids out and just study the background. Look for shapes, for a face. Just a kayak, just a couple of pictures. But someone was out there watching us. Close enough to see our faces, close enough to tie something to our dock without a sound. And whoever they weren't just passing through. They came back. I'm not the kind of person who jumps at shadows. I work in a trauma center in Knoxville. Blood, broken bones, people screaming, the worst days of someone's life, all of it. So believe me when I say I don't scare easy. You get used to chaos in that kind of environment and your brain builds a filter for fear. If it's not life-threatening or bleeding out, I'm usually not bothered. But what happened at that cabin on Norris Lake, it still messes with my head. And not in a gory, dramatic way. It was subtle, creeping. And it's the kind of thing that catches you when you're trying to sleep or walking past a dark hallway at home. I had just come off a brutal month at the hospital. Back-to-back shifts, back injuries, psych patients, one guy who tried to punch me for taking his blood pressure. Allison, my younger sister, had been telling me to take a break for weeks. She found a rental cabin online. A pretty simple place, just a quiet spot with lake access, Wi-Fi, and decent reviews. It sounded perfect. I said yes without asking many questions. We got there on a Friday afternoon just before sunset. The place was tucked away off a gravel road that curved down into a pine-covered slope. The whole place had that damp forest smell, like damp wood and moss. There were no other houses in sight, and the lake shimmered through the trees like a postcard. The cabin was cute in a weird way. Mid-century furniture, big windows, wraparound porch, and at least 6 mounted deer heads glaring at us from the walls. It felt lived in, but clean. Cozy, even. Allison joked that it looked like someone's hunting grandpa had turned into a minimalist influencer. We dropped our bags in the 2 guest rooms and started settling in. There was a 3rd room in the hallway between ours, but the door was locked. A note taped to it read, "Owner's storage. Please do not attempt to open." I didn't think twice. Allison raised an eyebrow and said, "Classic horror movie move." We laughed, poured wine, made frozen pizzas, and sat out on the porch until it got too cold. That night, around 2:30 a.m., I woke up with this sense that something was off. I didn't hear anything at first, but the kind of stillness in the cabin made the silence feel thick. Then I noticed a noise, soft and uneven, like the sound of something shifting liquid. Not a drip, more like sloshing. I figured it was the plumbing. I got up to check. Kitchen sink? Nothing. Bathroom? Dry. I opened the fridge just to rule out the ice maker. Nada. When I walked back through the hallway, I passed that locked door. That's when I heard it again. Slosh. Pause. Slosh. Like someone gently dragging a bucket through water. I stood there for a while, hand on the doorknob, even though I knew it was locked. The sound faded. I told myself it had to be the lake, maybe the wind echoing off the shore, or pipes groaning with the temperature drop. That made more sense. Next morning, I didn't bring it up, just figured I'd been half asleep. But as we sat on the porch with our coffee, Allison looked over and said, "Hey, weird question. Did you hear water moving last night?" I blinked. "You did too?" She nodded. "Yeah, thought it was you in the bath, but then it just stopped." We left it there. Went into town, had lunch, and spent the afternoon floating on the lake. It was perfect. Sunlight on the water, no cell service, just a boat drifting past now and then. That night, we grilled, played cards, and crashed early. It felt like we'd found the one peaceful pocket in Tennessee. But the next morning, everything changed. I was brushing my teeth when I noticed something dark near the base of the locked door. At first, I thought it was a shadow, but when I leaned down, I saw it was a slick, wet patch creeping under the frame. I crouched and touched it. Cold. Definitely water. "Allison," I called out. "Come here." She shuffled over in pajama pants, eyes still half closed. When she saw the water, she suddenly looked wide awake. "That wasn't there yesterday," she whispered. I grabbed a towel, tried to block the water from spreading into the carpet. It wasn't much, maybe a few cups worth, but it was still unsettling. There was no storm the night before. No plumbing on that side of the house as far as I knew. I called the number on the rental sheet. A guy named Corey answered after a few rings. He sounded groggy. "Hey, this is the cabin on Norris Lake, number 214. There's water coming out from under a locked room labeled owner storage." There was a pause. "That's not possible," he said. "That room's sealed. There's no plumbing in there." "Well, I'm standing in front of it and water's seeping out." He told us to leave it alone, said he'd contact the owner and get back to us. I asked if he wanted us to mop it up or put down towels. He just said not to open the door and promised to call back. He didn't. A couple of hours passed. The water spread into the hallway. I checked every faucet and line in the house. No signs of leaks. That's when Allison said, "We're opening it." I hesitated. He said not to. She gave me a look. "You really think we're just going to let it flood?" Fair point. We grabbed a long metal skewer from the kitchen and started fiddling with the lock. It took longer than we thought, but eventually the latch gave way. The door swung open. The smell hit us right away. Damp, earthy, like lake water trapped in a cellar. And it was cold. Not chilly. Cold like walking into a walk-in freezer. The room was small, about the size of a walk-in closet. Water covered the floor, up to our ankles. It rippled gently, like something had just moved through it. But there were no faucets, no holes. The walls were dry. The ceiling had no stains. It was like the water had appeared from nowhere. There were only a few items inside. Some plastic storage bins stacked against the back wall, a couple of folding chairs, and a rolled-up rug. But what made both of us stop was the far window. It was ajar, and water was dripping from the bottom of the frame, like someone soaking wet had just crawled through it. Allison moved slowly toward the window while I scanned the floor. That's when I saw a wetsuit draped over the back of one of the folding chairs. Not a modern one. This thing looked vintage, like something a commercial fisherman would have worn decades ago. It was soaked through and covered in spots with algae or mold, and it smelled briny, like salt water and decay. Neither of us touched it. We just stood there, staring. It didn't make sense. The room was locked from the inside. There were no boot prints, no puddles leading out, but something had been in there. Something left that suit behind. We didn't speak much after that, just quietly agreed it was time to go. We packed up in under 15 minutes. Didn't wait for Corey to call, didn't even lock the door behind us. Just left the key on the table and drove straight back to Knoxville. I can't stop thinking about that wetsuit. It looked so normal, like someone just stepped out of it and called it a day. But no one, not even the guy who rented us the place, had any explanation. Whatever had come through that window hadn't meant to be seen, and we opened the door it had been hiding behind. It could have picked any cabin, any weekend, but it picked ours. My name's Aaron. I'm 35, and when this happened, I'd just taken a leave of absence from work to finally focus on a novel I'd been pretending I'd write for the last 3 years. I'm an attorney by trade, and the day-to-day grind had ground me down more than I realized. Mason, my partner of 7 years, suggested we escape somewhere remote. He found this quiet lake house up in Grand Lake, Colorado. Off-season meant cheaper rates and fewer tourists. We were looking for peace, a reset button, something to clear our heads. We got there mid-October, just as the leaves were turning brittle and the air carried that faint bite that tells you snow isn't far off. The cabin sat tucked in a little pocket of tall pines, hidden off a gravel road that looped around the lake. There weren't any other houses visible from the porch, just trees, sky, and water. It was gorgeous in a way that almost made you feel guilty, like you'd stepped into a painting you didn't pay for. Before we even unlocked the door, we noticed the firewood. To the left of the porch, stacked with surgical precision, was a pile of freshly chopped logs. They were so recently cut you could still see sap beating at the ends. The bark looked clean, not faded or dried out. Some of the pieces even had bits of wet sawdust on them. Mason walked over, ran his hand across the top. This wasn't here long. Whoever did this has sharp tools. We figured maybe the rental company stocked the place before we arrived. Inside, the cabin was exactly as promised. Cozy, rustic, a little heavy on the hunting lodge aesthetic, but clean. There was a big stone fireplace, shelves lined with dog-eared paperbacks, and a small desk with a lake view that I claimed immediately. I called the property manager to thank him for the wood. His name was Troy, and he sounded surprised. I didn't send anyone out there. We haven't had guests since May. You sure it's new? I looked outside. Pretty sure. Still smells like fresh-cut pine. There's no staff in the area right now. Closest property we maintain is 4 miles down the road. Gave me pause, but I brushed it off. Maybe a local was being generous. Small towns do weirdly nice things sometimes. That first day we settled in, unpacked our bags, took a walk down to the dock, and made an easy dinner. It felt almost too good to be true, but I figured I just wasn't used to peace and quiet anymore. That night, after dinner, we curled up by the fire. No TV, no phones, just music and a couple of worn paperbacks we grabbed off the shelves. Around 11:30, we were reading on the couch when we heard footsteps outside. Not just footsteps, gravel crunching under a steady pace. Not rushed, not hesitant, just walking. We paused the music, listened. Mason stood, moved to the front window, pulled the curtain back just a little. "See anything?" I whispered. He shook his head. Could be an animal. But then we heard it again, around the side of the cabin this time. Crunch, drag, another pause. I turned off the remaining lights. We both stood there in silence, waiting. It got so quiet I felt like even breathing was too loud. Mason grabbed the flashlight, slipped on his boots, and stepped outside. I watched from the window, trying not to blink. He came back 10 minutes later, shaking his head. No one out there, no prints either. Just gravel. We laughed it off. Kind of. The next morning, I stepped out onto the porch with my coffee and nearly spilled it. Right beside the original pile of firewood was a second one. Smaller, but same type of wood, same neat stack. "Mason?" I called. He came out and froze. "That wasn't there last night." "Nope." We stood there for a long time. Neither of us said what we were thinking, that someone had been there, close enough to the house to stack wood without us noticing. Still, we tried to make sense of it. Maybe Troy was confused. Maybe this was some weird regional courtesy. Maybe we were overreacting. We decided to go about our day like normal. We hiked a bit along the edge of the lake, ate lunch on the dock, even joked about how our mysterious woodsman might leave us breakfast next. That helped, for a while. That night, just after midnight, we heard it again. Crunch. Pause. Then, far off but distinct, a dull thunk. We looked at each other. "That's an axe," Mason said. We stayed up the rest of the night. Lights on. Mason sat on the porch with a fire poker, and I stayed by the window, watching. We didn't see anything. But the next morning, a third stack of wood was waiting. This one was closer, just a foot from the porch step. I called Troy again. He said he'd call the sheriff. An hour later, a deputy named Nolan drove up the long gravel road. He walked the perimeter, poked around a bit, then came inside to talk. "You didn't see anyone?" "No." "Any prints? Tracks?" "Just gravel." He asked a few more questions, mostly routine stuff, then sighed. "There was a guy who used to live off-grid near here, real woodsman type. Chopped his own wood, didn't talk to folks. Disappeared a few years back. We figured he moved on, but maybe..." He trailed off. "Maybe what?" I asked. "Nothing. Just if anything else weird happens, give us a call." That night we debated leaving, but Mason insisted we stay one more day and see if anything else happened. Maybe it would stop. Maybe whoever it was had made their point. We tried to act normal, cooked dinner, played cards, but we didn't sleep much. Around 3 a.m., I heard something soft, like someone breathing just outside the bedroom window. When I pulled back the curtain, nothing was there. The next morning, there was no new wood, just the same 3 stacks. We were packing to leave when Mason noticed one of his gloves missing. We'd left them by the door. Hours later, I found it, tucked between 2 logs in the newest stack. It was damp, and it smelled like pine. That was enough. We packed the car in silence. Didn't even sweep the floors, just locked the place and left. I texted Troy to say we were checking out early. Never told him why. 3 weeks passed. We tried to forget about it. Told ourselves it was just a weird neighbor or an old forest caretaker who didn't realize the property was rented. We don't have any answers, but we haven't gone back to the mountains since. Name's David. I'm a retired Army medic, and I don't spook easy. After 20 years in, my wife and I decided to settle somewhere quiet, away from the chaos and the crowds. We found a place on the Vermont side of Lake Champlain, little house right on the water. Quiet, beautiful, isolated. Exactly what we were looking for. It's not one of those flashy lake houses with speedboats and jet skis. Ours is old wood, creaky floors, and a porch that faces the lake. No neighbors in shouting distance, just some forest behind us and that big stretch of water out front. Retirement was about sleeping in, fishing off the dock, maybe growing tomatoes. My wife likes to paint, and I'd taken up tying my own fishing flies. Quiet hobbies for a quiet life. We'd even named the house Stillwater. It felt peaceful. Things were good. Real good. Until it started. This happened late October 2021. That morning, I woke up around 4:30 a.m. Not sure why. I'm an early riser, but this was earlier than usual. It was cold. I remember that. Colder than it should have been for that time of year. The fog was so thick I could barely see the trees by the shoreline. I was standing at the kitchen window, drinking water, when I heard it. A scream. Not like someone stubbing their toe. No. This was from across the lake. A direct, panicked yell. It echoed through the fog like it had nowhere else to go. I went still, listened hard. Then came another one, muffled, but the same tone. Desperate, raw. I called out to my wife, told her to stay inside, and grabbed my coat. No way I was going to ignore something like that. I walked down to the dock and scanned the lake. but it was like standing inside a cloud. Couldn't see past 20 feet. The water was dead calm. I called 911, explained what I heard. They said a patrol boat was already out doing early rounds and they'd circle our side. I stood on the dock for nearly an hour. Nothing. No more sounds. The patrol boat came by eventually, asked a few questions, but they hadn't seen anything. No stranded boats, no swimmers, no signs of distress. They said sound carries strangely across water in the fog, could have been from miles off. The rest of that day was quiet. We figured maybe it had come from the other side of the lake, or maybe someone playing a prank. My wife even joked that maybe a fox had gotten loud. I wanted to believe that. But that evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, the fog rolled back in. Fast. One moment the lake was glassy and wide, and the next it was gone, swallowed by thick white nothing. It crept all the way to our porch, soaking the screens and muting every sound. Even the loons went quiet. Around 9 p.m., I was out near the shed, locking up my gear for the night, when I heard something again. A splash, not far out. Then another, closer. I grabbed my flashlight and walked toward the dock. My wife called after me, said she didn't like it. I didn't either, but I needed to see. I got about halfway down the dock when something banged against the ladder, the one on the side that drops into the water. Not a small bump, a bang, like something hit it from underneath. I swung the light down, expecting maybe a log or a big fish, but the water was still again. Nothing in sight. Then I saw them. Footprints, wet ones, on the dock, leading up from the ladder. Clear as day, right there in the beam of my flashlight. Barefoot, human. They stopped about 10 feet in, like someone had stepped out of the lake, walked just far enough to get your attention, and vanished. I looked around. No splashing, no voices, nothing moving in the fog. I backed up, slow, and went inside. My wife saw my face and didn't ask questions. We locked up everything. Doors, windows, even the attic hatch. Slept in the living room with the lights on that night. Didn't sleep much. Every few minutes, I got up and checked the porch. Nothing. The next day, I checked the dock again. No footprints, not even watermarks. Like they'd never been there. We thought about calling the cops again, but what would we even say? That someone climbed up our dock in the fog and then disappeared? There was no damage, nothing stolen, just wet prints and a scream we couldn't explain. That afternoon, I checked our trail cam we'd set up behind the house to watch for deer. It hadn't captured anything unusual, just a few raccoons and one blurry shape that might have been a bird. Nothing from the lakeside. That made my skin crawl. Whatever had stepped out onto the dock hadn't triggered the motion sensor, or it had, and something went wrong. 3 days later, it happened again. Same time, same scream. This time, I didn't go outside, just sat in the dark, flashlight in my lap, waiting. The scream echoed once, then again, fainter. I sat there till the sky turned gray and the fog began to lift. Didn't say a word, just watched. Over the next week, the fog kept coming back. Not every night, but enough to keep me uneasy. We started making changes, installed extra locks, put up motion lights. I stopped going out on the dock. We kept the blinds drawn in the evenings, and I started sleeping with a flashlight by the bed. Not because I thought it'd help, just because I needed to feel like I was doing something. I talked to a guy at the bait shop who'd lived in town for 40 years. Told him I'd heard something strange on the lake. He went quiet. Said, "You're not the first." Wouldn't say more than that. Just told me fog season had its own rules. Said the lake was older than people remembered. Told me to keep my lights on and never answer a voice coming from the water. A few days later, we had company over, our niece and her boyfriend, just for the weekend. I didn't mention anything to them. Didn't want to scare them off. That night, the fog came early. While we were eating on the porch, we heard something, just a faint splash. Our niece looked out and said, "Did someone fall in?" I said no. Her boyfriend offered to check, but I stopped him, told him it was probably just a fish. Later, after they went to bed, I sat in the chair by the window. Same spot. Flashlight in my lap. Around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps on the deck. Not ours. Slow, unhurried, wet. I stood but didn't move forward, didn't pull the curtain aside. I just waited. A minute later, I heard them fade back the way they came. Nothing else. The next morning, the motion light was off. No prints, no marks. But the dock ladder was wet again. Not from dew, dripping wet, like someone had climbed up and waited. I told my wife I wanted to sell the house. She said she'd been thinking the same. Now, every time it fogs up, I don't sleep. I sit in that same chair by the window, flashlight in my lap, watching the lake disappear into white. I wait. And the dock? I haven't stepped on it since. If these lake house stories made you question isolation, wait until help stops answering. Smash that like button, hit subscribe, and drop what you do in these nightmare scenarios. And if you still think calling the cops makes you safe, this next video might ruin that idea. Click now to watch 4 disturbing horror stories where police couldn't help. Because sometimes the scariest word you'll hear is, "There's nothing we can do." Stay ready, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.